that voted to legalize marijuana. You had the state of Nevada doing the same thing. Other locations doing the same thing, either including recreational or just medicinal. And the end result of that in Idaho is that close to 80% of Idaho's borders on states where marijuana is legal in whole or in part. In Montana, it's legal on the medicinal front, which can sometimes be a little bit porous leading into the recreational front too, as people in California have been aware of for a good many years. But that it changes the picture quite a bit. The West is now almost dominated by states that have done this. There's no particular strong indicator that Idaho's on the verge of doing that. I don't expect that's real likely, but there was a push in Wyoming in the last cycle to try to do something along these lines. There was a petition effort. Petition effort failed, but the support for recreational marijuana in Wyoming appears to be very strong, according to the university polling there. So it's something that I think is going to be coming back up again in Idaho, is particularly as people go past the borders. We don't have checkpoints at the borders between the various states, so there's going to be a lot of porous traffic across Idaho, particularly in places like Lewiston, Idaho, and Clarkston, Washington, and Coeur d'Alene, and Idaho, and Spokane, Washington, and probably and this has come up in the Times News. There's going to be a fair amount of looking about what's happening on Highway 93 between Twin Falls and Jackpot.
I mean, I'm not unawares that there are people out there already growing it and smoking it and selling it. But I'm reminded of a columnist at the Washington Post named Ruth Marcus. Now, she's an acquaintance. We've been writing back and forth for several years on various topics. She had a column, and she admits to having been a user herself when she was younger, before she started a family. Most people, when they get to a certain age, I guess they just stop doing that. They grow up a bit. But she said that she had for years thought it was a good idea, but she's changed her mind. She says that this is just another one of those bricks being chiseled out of the wall, and that she suddenly has joined this slippery slope argument. And I think that it's odd to see someone from that perspective take that sort of opposition. But there are people out there who do believe that it's just legalizing one more thing, that we're going to get to a point where there are no taboos left any longer.
Well, you make taboos if you. I guess the counter argument to that would be you make taboos for a reason, not just as a gesture. You declare that something should be banned or something should not be done because you have a specific reason to do that. And as time has gone on and as experience is starting to show in some of these states, there aren't really a lot of specific good reasons in this case. The social results in Washington, Oregon so far, which have had legalized marijuana now for a significant enough period of time that you can kind of judge what some of the results are, is that not a whole lot has changed except that some of the people who might have been arrested before aren't being arrested, and jails are not quite as full as they were, and people who use marijuana are a little bit more, who do use marijuana and did before, are a little bit more able and willing to get help if they need it, because previously they would be at legal risk if they tried to get help.
Well, it seems to me that the only way that this would move forward in the state legislature, you would, and the governor certainly wouldn't be in favor, but the only way to change the minds of a large number of people, you would need somebody in the Republican caucus who would have the stature that could come forward and say, we've got to do this or we will do this, and then other people would follow. And I don't know that anybody has reached that point yet.
I don't see any evidence of it either. No. I'm not really holding my breath on that front. A few years ago, there was a state legislator named Tom Trail. He was a Republican. He was from Moscow. He was one of the less conservative in the Republican caucus, but he tried to introduce legislation to allow for the growing of hemp, which genetically is fairly closely related to the marijuana plants, but unlike them, has no psychotropic properties. You can't smoke it or do anything like that. There's nothing recreational about it. There could possibly be something medicinal about it, but hemp has been used for all kinds of products for years. George Washington grew hemp. That's internationally we import it, but many places in the United States ban the growing of it, including Idaho, simply because it's related to marijuana, not because you can use it in anything like the similar way. Trail tried to legalize the growing of hemp, but even the fact that it was a distant relative, and had none of uh, the same kind of properties of marijuana that we associate with that wasn't good enough. He couldn't even get his bill introduced. So it's a very very tough road in the Idaho legislature, and I would think that when and if the day comes in Idaho that something were to happen, I would expect that it would happen probably by way of initiative, which is the way that it happened, for that matter, in places like Washington and Oregon. The legislatures were not the ones that passed the legislation. It was the voters of those states. Same in California.
Our time is 8:52, and we're at 42. Randy Stapilus, the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing, is our guest. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story this morning. For people who'd like to read the briefing, what's the web address?
It is www.ridenbaugh.com, Ridenbaugh.
There was a column last week in the Rexburg newspaper from Ron Nate, and he was talking about what will happen when the day comes, which I think he's right on this, that the federal government simply will not be able to share a lot of its largesse with the states. And he's pointing out just how much of Idaho's budget right now is dependent on that. Would that need, because I think what's happened in a lot of these states is there is a need for revenue, and taxing marijuana is the reason a lot of people drop their opposition. Do you see that possibility?
Well, it could be kind of another factor to a degree. It that aspect of it, the tax revenue that comes from it probably shouldn't be overstated. It is real. The states of Washington and Oregon wound up with a good deal more tax revenue than they had originally expected before legalization occurred. But I think maybe a larger element of it is the fact that there's simply a whole new industry there. There are new stores, new suppliers, plenty of new people at least in the above ground economy that are kind of adding to the money flow, and adding a little bit to the prosperity in some areas anyway. Uh, I don't think that it's likely going to be enough to solve major budget problems or fill major budget holes, but it would be another small piece that might assist.
We have a lot of discussion going on among people on air about use of federal lands in the state of Idaho, and you point out in the briefing this week that there's going to be a public hearing about the use of motorized vehicles in Hawaii County. Obviously, the BLM has some large holdings there. They're looking for input from the public. Is there some discussion about perhaps banning the public from wandering the desert?
Well, not keeping the public out per se. That's pretty much those areas, the wilderness areas that were declared a few years ago through the Hawaii Canyonlands Wilderness, that Senator Crapo worked on, and other BLM holdings. Uh, they're not talking about excluding people per se, but there are questions about where exactly motor vehicles will be able to run, because generally motor vehicles are not allowed in wilderness areas. So they've developed a plan that includes, throughout a very large area, more about 1,000 square miles, about something like 1,500 miles of roads that would be included. And so they're throwing that out there to see what the reaction is to allowing to allowing people in certain areas. Uh, Wilderness areas are intended to be places where people can come. They can walk out there. They can hike out there. Uh, in areas where there are waterways, they can boat down there. But motors are not generally not supposed to be seen or heard in wilderness areas. So that'll be, I'm sure a lot of people will be taking a pretty close look at that when the map comes out and people see what the plan is for where exactly they can drive their car.
Glad I got my four wheeling in last summer out there.
Well, there'll be some available, but it may change a little bit.
We have to wrap things up. We didn't get a chance to talk about the governor's trip to China. We may have to revisit that at some point. And there's a lot of detail there that might be further of an entire discussion. But we do want to thank you for joining us this morning. And very quickly, again, if you could share with folks what we were talking about when it comes to people reading the briefing, how do they go about doing it?
They could go to www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
Randy Stapilus, thank you much. We'll talk to you next Monday.
Talk to you then.
Randy Stapilus, of course, the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing, and he joins us Monday mornings between 8:40 and 9 o'clock on News Radio 13. I'll get that out in just a minute. Got a bit of a dry throat this morning. You know what happens is you shake hands with people at church this time of year, and then the next day, all of a sudden, you start to feel it, and then it's like, oops. That's why the woman ahead of me yesterday had the hand sanitizer. As soon as she finished shaking hands, she cleaned her hands off because she wasn't trying to insult anybody. I know what she's concerned about. Happened to me last winter, too, as well. News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. We're talking about recruitment for the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department in just a few minutes. The news is coming up next from Fox. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Oh, one other quick thing. I think we're going to have somebody here Wednesday. It's the last show before the holiday weekend. We're taking Thursday and Friday off. Who's going to be talking about the Model Railroad open house coming up in December, which, if you haven't seen it yet, the facility they have at the Twin Falls County Fair, this is your opportunity to drop in and see one of the great hobbies of the last 100 years in this country. We've got plenty more coming up.